And you don't want to judge people based on their words, based on their charming personality, based on their glittering resume. You want to be able to judge their character, what's deep, deep inside of them, right? The things that are not so visible at first glance, right? So you have to train how you think about people. You have to observe their patterns in life before you met them. It's going to sound pretentious, but I really loved Machiavelli himself. I liked the kind of brutality of his tone. He was talking about power, and he described it in a way that was so brutally frank and honest. It just was powerful. The style was powerful. He used a lot of imperatives, do this, don't do that. And he used strong languages and short sentences, very direct. He addressed the reader. Yeah. You could hear his voice in your head. And I didn't want to sound like I came from the 16th century, but I liked the overall feel of Machiavelli, and that's sort of who I modeled myself on. We have an animal part of us where we feel certain things about people on that first encounter or second encounter that's not rational, that's intuitive, and then we don't trust it. And often it happens in a microsecond, in a flash. You meet somebody and you sense a chemistry or something a little bit wrong. But if I met somebody like you who seems very genuine and sincere, and I can read it in your face and I feel it, I don't need to be wary. But particularly with women, dealing with men, because quite frankly, the more dangerous, toxic type will be men.
Right. Got it.
Women will often have an intuition, a sense of something isn't quite right, but they don't trust it and they go on. But we all have that feeling. Trust it. And you could be wrong, but it doesn't hurt to be a little bit wary of someone. Children have that natural inclination. I know for me, I felt connected to words and writing when I was very, very, very young. And the education system ruins it. It makes you so distracted. You lose that confidence. You no longer are able to hear that voice. I call it a voice that's inside of you, that's drawing you towards. One of the books I have is the 33 Strategies of War, and I talk about deterrence, the need to deter people from harming you. So if people are very aggressive and you show that you're kind of weak and that you're willing to take the abuse, they're just going to keep doing it. It brings out the tiger in them, it brings out the lion. They're going to keep doing it again and again. You need to show them, hey, don't mess with me. You need to show them one time, you do that to me and you're going to pay a really fucking bad price for it. Back off. Well, in doing that, you're kind of lowering yourself a little bit. It's not something you would normally do, but it's necessary in the game of life to show people you can't be messed with. I generally believe in the soft approach in the world today, in being seductive and charming, thinking about everybody that you're working with and trying to be a good courtier. But at the same time, you can't be naive. Napoleon Bonaparte said, it's putting your iron hand inside a velvet glove. So if they're going to hit you, you're ready to hit them back. In your 20s, which is the most important part of your life, I think, it's where you're discovering yourself. It's where all the seeds are planted for what's going to happen to you. You're exploring, you're trying things out, you're experimenting with different careers, you're gaining skills because you're learning. Like you said, you wanted to learn. And then you're 32, 33, and you start a podcast, a website, your own business, and maybe it fails, but you're excited it's your own, and then you learn from it, and then you create something even better. Man, it's like the greatest feeling in the world. You don't need anything else. You've accomplished something. You set a goal and you reached it. It is, to me, a feeling of high. We are in deep, deep denial of the fact that we are mortal creatures. And I believe that with that denial comes a great deal of latent anxiety in your life. It makes you anxious and fearful for a lot of little smaller things in life, which is why somebody who's had a near-death experience gets rid of that anxiety and doesn't have that kind of avoidant mentality. So I want to open up, we tend to turn our back towards death, and I want you to turn around and face it square in the eye every single day. It's not a negative thing. It's an immensely beautiful thing. What I want to train you, the reader, to look at is to not look at what they say or their appearance, but to look at their actions and the patterns of their behavior. So for instance, I talk about Howard Hughes in chapter 4 as somebody who's got a very weak character, who was a horrific businessman, and people were lured in by his image of this sort of maverick aviator, kind of, great Hollywood person, etc. But if you looked at the patterns of his behavior, you would have seen that he was actually quite toxic. So stop looking at what people say about themselves and look at their actions. Martin Luther King was one of my heroes. He had some of those frustrations and some of that anger. You know, he grew up in Atlanta where there wasn't as much racism because he was in a relatively good neighborhood. His father was a preacher. He saw racism, but he was a little bit shielded from it. And then he had his first encounters, particularly when he went up north to like Boston. Believe it or not, it was in the north that he had his first real encounters. And then he's like, God, he was really angry about it. It really was an eye-opener. And he learned that he couldn't give into that kind of emotion. What he was going to do with his life is he was going to use it to help blacks in the South. He was going to return to the South. His path, he thought, was to stay in Boston, New England, because it was like cushy, etc. But then he realized, no, I've got to take all this bitterness that I feel and I've got to go back to the South at the risk of my own life and help my people, you know? So working for a cause is probably the best way you can channel some of that dark energy.
The great architect Santiago Calatrava, who I interviewed for this book, and Calatrava would say the greatest danger he faced in designing a building is after 5-6 years of working on a project, it would go stale and it no longer felt alive to him and he didn't know why he was doing it, and it was a terrible feeling. And so what would happen whenever that happened to him is he would reassess it and then throw everything out. He would throw out all the drawings, all the 6 years of work, and start all over. And people would look at him like he was crazy. He did it because he had to get back to that sort of freshness that he needed to be more creative and in the moment. And he said, I didn't care. I don't care if I have to throw out 6 years of work. The feeling of making it better and being more alive in the moment is what matters. I thought that was sort of a powerful way of expressing it.